Hey, what is going on, everybody? Jesse Delgado, and I'm excited to have Jeff Abramovitz with us. I'm going to be interviewing him, and he's got an amazing background in digital marketing and working with churches, working with the faith-based, the Christian community, and a whole bunch of experience. So I'll let him kind of just kick it off. Tell us a little bit about what you do and how you got into doing it.
Sure. Well, first, as we were talking, on Saturday is my 34th wedding anniversary. So, first things first, I'm a dad and a husband. I've got 3 grown children, 2 are married, and got our first grandchild. So all that stuff in perspective, that's what keeps me humble. And yeah, I've been in digital marketing since, I feel like almost its inception. There are people who've been in it longer, but I kind of got in on the ground floor when Twitter was still a weird thing and nobody knew what it was. And I did it when I was working at Family Life. Family Life is a ministry of Campus Crusade for Christ, focusing on marriage and family, on how to instill God's principles into marriage and family. And so that's, my wife and I were on staff of Family Life for about 10 years. And I left and explored more my digital marketing experience. I worked in faith-based films, did some marketing for them, and then I really tried to figure out how this whole digital marketing thing was going to work. When I first started back in the late 2008-9 time frame, I tried to figure out on my own how to use these tools. So Twitter was new. Facebook had just come from being only for schools, colleges, high schools, and it was open to the public back in about 2008, 2009. And so I wrote a dad blog, and I started my own podcast back in about 2009 and 10. And I was going to try to figure out how to use these tools to help promote my material, my resources. And so that's kind of how I got launched into it. It was mainly being self-taught, but I really saw the potential for how this whole digital marketing area could be used, not only for a lot of the evil things that people can see it for, right?
Sure.
It's very time-consuming. It can really, there are some things now that we now know that we didn't know back then in terms of, what does it do for community and what does it do for relationships? But we have a whole new generation of kids who are native to this, right? They grew up not knowing what it was like to not have an iPad or a cell phone that you didn't have to flip, or it wasn't the size of a phone book. I grew up, those things weren't around. And so now we have a generation that is calling a Facebook relationship or an Instagram relationship as a real relationship. And so we can either fight that, and I think there's certainly debate to go on either side, and we're going to see social studies that come out, I'm sure, and talk about the menaces of that, so to speak. But I also think there's a real opportunity for us, if we learn how to use it well, for us to share not just our own beliefs and just throw them out there, one way, but to actually engage in dialogue with people about some significant things in life. I think the thing that really opened my eyes to how this could be used was when I was at a funeral back in, I think it was like 2008, 2009. We were on staff with another couple whose daughter got killed in a car accident. She was 17 years old. She had wandered away from her faith, but she had recently come back. But she got into a car with a guy who had been drunk, another teenager, and they took a curve too fast and she got killed. And I remember going to her funeral and hearing her story and how she had kind of been, wandered away from the faith that she knew, but she was coming back to it. And, for those who call themselves Christians, we believe that that this life isn't all there is, that there is something else, for those who call themselves Christ followers. And so I just sent a tweet at the time, just didn't know what was going to happen. I said, hey, I'm at a funeral, which is really sad, but I know where this girl is going because she professed a faith in Christ. Mm-hmm. And somebody actually sent me a direct message, which on Twitter is like a personal chat message, text message, and said, hey, how do you know that you know where she's going forever? And that began a conversation. We went back and forth talking about real faith issues. And that showed me that this this medium, this kind of, at that time, newfound a way to engage with people you never would have otherwise, is going to really open some doors for those who are prepared for it. So even though I'm in digital marketing, and so most of my engagement with it is really all about how to get people to, know a client's products and services and eventually buy them.
Right.
That's what I do. I see it as much more than that. It certainly has its limitations, it certainly has its pitfalls, and there are certainly some societal issues that we're discussing now that we weren't back then as we start to see these things roll out. In fact, I think Mark Zuckerberg in the last year is trying to address the issues that we are raising in digital marketing, which is how much time are you spending on your devices, right? There's this danger that when you sit down at a table, you can't have face-to-face conversation because everyone's got their face in a device. And all those things detract from where I believe God really designed us, was we are relational people. First of all, He wanted to create a relationship with us through Christ, and then He wanted to create a relationship with others. But in some ways, this is really like new wineskin, right? So the message is the same. It's still the same life-saving message that it's always been. But for those who have never heard it, it's new. It's a new message to those who don't know what it can mean. And the new wineskin, you don't put a new message in an old wineskin. And so Paul says in his letters that, He became all things to all people so that some might know Jesus. And so that's really my whole impetus behind all of this, is how can we figure out a way to continue to use these tools, because I'm a gray-haired. I mean, you can see it's not, it's funny, I was at a workshop, and one of the volunteers was greeting people as they came in, and she goes, "Oh, I'm so glad to see somebody that's my age coming to these things," So I realize I'm a little bit of a dinosaur in this, but I love the context of what it is and what it can do, because I'm a relational person. And so that's really, that's been my journey, is how do we continue to use these tools and as vessels for good and bastions of truth, not just lobbing bombs and grenades over to the other side when we disagree, which is really unfortunately how so many use it, but how can we use it to really engage people and engage in relationship?
And I think that's actually really important, because you have seen a lot of technology advancements, right? You've seen things come and go, and because you have been around a little longer, you have a different perspective of it, as to where, the generation, kind of now, and, that's just being born into it, like you mentioned, that's all they know. All they know is social media followers, online bullying, right? You growing up, the bullies were at school.
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
And that's where they were at. Now they're online, and there's a lot of, mental health issues, right?
That's
that are coming up a lot. And so, can you speak a little bit from that perspective? Obviously, there's, like you said, the discussion of, the pros and cons, right? But not so much from that perspective, but maybe from the perspective of your generation, how they should view some of these things, right? Because I'm sure there's a balance. Can you talk a little bit to your generation, how they should view social media?
Right. Yeah, it's a good question, and I don't know that I have a good answer. I only know what I know. I'm not a prophet, or I do have a kind of a strategic outlook on life, and see things kind of as they unfold, or a little before they unfold sometimes. But I don't think it's something we should be afraid of. But I do think, as with anything, it's about balance, right? The one thing that my generation, I think, they certainly have embraced it so they can stay in touch with people in their life, right? So I can go back and maybe find some old classmates that I never connected with, or I haven't connected with for a while. And so it does allow, it allows you to go back through time and reconnect with people that maybe you just wouldn't have otherwise. And you certainly use it to see pictures of your grandkids and stay connected if you're across the miles from others. And it opens up your eyes to things that are going on outside of your life. But unfortunately, I think the skepticism probably in people my age and above is somewhat warranted, in that for the most part, you're only going to see online what people want you to see. Very seldom does anyone, and because that's not always what the channel is about, right? I mean, there are some times when you will find things online that might disturb you about where somebody is at in their life, and it prompts you to want to be able to do or invest in something. But I think our generation, my generation and above is, I think they've certainly embraced it. When you look at the numbers in terms of who's on Facebook and who's on Instagram, certainly the numbers skew down in terms of age on Instagram. But it's creeping up. I think to some degree, it's when my generation embraced Facebook, that generation went to Instagram, right? I mean, that's kind of how it was. It's a different platform. It's different in how it's used. Certainly more visual and story oriented. But all that to say, my generation is pretty engaged in it. The issue is to not be afraid of it, but also to see how can we use these tools for what we want, those things in our life that we want to be a part of. What do we want to stand for? And I think that's probably how I.
So let me ask you this, within the context of churches and the faith-based community, how important is it for churches, big and small, to have a social media presence, to be actively reaching, people on social media? What would you say?
Well, it's got to be part of the DNA of how you let people know who you are and what you stand for. Again, going back over the years, I mean, when I grew up, television had just transitioned from being black and white to color, right? And I was the remote control. Hey, can you get up and change the channel? And they had radio and they had direct mail, right? I mean, and there was newspapers and magazines. So you found out about things outside of your circle by one of those means, So if there was a new church that was planted down the road, you would only know it because either you've met a friend that went to it, maybe they took out an advertisement on a television station or put it into a magazine, or maybe they sent out direct mail flyers, they went door to door. That's how else would you know it was there except for that, right? And then once you got there, for them to tell you what's going on in the church, people had to actually physically be there. Now we've gotten now we get inundated with information, but all we've done is increase the distribution channels for information. That's really all social media is, right? It's gone from saying, it used to be you'd only advertise on the Super Bowl if you wanted to get brand awareness. Now they still advertise in the Super Bowl, but now I've got Facebook, and I've got LinkedIn, and I've got Twitter, and I got Pinterest, and I have Instagram, and I got Snapchat, and I have YouTube, and I have to know how to do things on Google for search, because that's how people find you through websites. And I think that overwhelms most people my age and above, right? It's so much, I don't even know where to start. But if you want to reach the younger generation, if you don't want your church to be obsolete in 15 to 20 years, which is about, if people start coming, you'll be done in 20 years, right? I mean, that's just about a generation. And if you want to be relevant about the issue that the culture is dealing with, then you need to embrace the technology, and then you got to find out people. You got to find out people who understand how to navigate in the technology to be able to use it to spread the message that you have. There are tons of ways to do it, but using stories, using video, just look online and do searches on churches. It rhymes, doesn't it? Search on church and just see what other churches are doing. If you're really confused as to how to do it and where to start, that's some of the best place. Because some of the best, to be honest with you, some of the more innovative technology is in some of the churches. Now the church generally tends to be on the lagging edge of things, right? They tend to wait until everything is just so, and then they'll jump in. And I just don't think you can wait that long. I think if you're not involved in social media in some way, and I don't just mean, posting once, our services are at 9 and 10:30 this Sunday, come and join us. I'm talking about sharing messages, sharing stories, sharing hope the same messages that you're giving out on Sunday morning to the 100 to 500 to 1,000 that are sitting in your pews, you've got to figure out how to put those together in bite-sized chunks and get those messages out using these various channels.
That's a great point. So the way that you were introduced to me was through Alejandro Reyes. Shouts out to Alejandro Reyes, another Christ follower, digital marketer. So it's cool to see Christians being represented in this space. Yourself, Alejandro, people like Sean Cannell, and just several other people as well. It's really cool to see kingdom believers, that are in this space as well. So part of what he told me about you, and you can correct me or him, is that you are a master at Facebook and Facebook advertising. And, when we talk about Facebook, earlier we were talking about how it changes so much and how, you can write a whole program and course for it, and next month it could be all obsolete. Can you give them some tips, maybe a bite-sized strategy to start implementing some of these things?
Sure. Yeah, again, there are no silver bullets. We talked about that yesterday, Jesse, that, people, if you've tried and you've put your coin in the Facebook machine and didn't get anything out, for a lot of people, listen, we don't have a lot of money to throw away, right? And especially churches. And so they'll look past how can we use this effectively. But there are a lot of different strategies that you can use. But first place, first you have to have a mindset in your organization that you're going to use these platforms, right? And so it's not just about, okay, I'm going to start advertising. It's about what is our Facebook strategy? What's the demographic of our church? And understanding that, based on who's coming to your church, how are we going to use these tools to supplement what we already have going on in the church? So whether it's, informational, whether it's to get people to engage at times that they wouldn't be at church from a donation standpoint, that's a big question. How do I get people to donate more using Facebook? And, because that's a church's concern. Sure. My rebuttal to that is somebody who's raised support for full-time missions work when I was at Family Life is just like you would never ask somebody to donate that first came to your church, you don't lead with that when you do something on social media, right? You don't just simply come out and say, don't, and expect it to be successful, yeah. Right? Because until people know that you have an answer for the issues that they're facing, you're probably not going to get their money. But when they come to your church and they see that what you are providing is the hope of Christ, and that they're not just simply giving to you, they're giving to Him, and they know that and they see the impact of it, that they're not feathering your nest, they're not just building a building, but they're actually contributing to ministry, to lives being changed, then I believe no matter what age they are, they want to be a part of it. We live in a very cause-oriented culture. So somehow you've got to kind of connect to that using these tools like Facebook. So strategy first is what's our presence on Facebook and what are we going to do? And then there are some real tactical things that I've learned from some really good people. They're not necessarily believers, but I'm okay with that. I'm going to take whatever I can that works. Guys like Dennis Yu that we talked about yesterday. Dennis he's a caring guy. I don't know where he's at from a faith standpoint, but what I know is he's really, really smart. I'm on Facebook advertising. And he uses something called Facebook for $1 a day. And so there's a whole strategy about how can I just spend $1 a day to get what I'm posting on my Facebook page out to more people, right? So it may be the pastor, and again, part of it's a mindset. It's the church saying, all right, how are we going to do our in-person ministry, and what are we going to do outside of that? How are we going to message people with the same hope that we wanted to give to the people who came, but maybe they're not going to come? See, I think sometimes there's a fear like, and if we give away too much material offline, people won't come online. Now, I'm a huge advocate saying, listen, Acts 2 is it's still a good model for us today. We need to gather, right? Hebrews talks about gathering together, followers. So I'm not saying do one versus the other. What I'm saying is I think you need to do both.
Yeah.
Right? I want people to come. I'm going to invite people to come to my church. That's where life happens, in small groups and community groups. But you need a digital strategy. You got to say, all right, well, maybe I'm going to have my pastor after a sermon talk about ways that, there might be 3 kind of behind the scenes looks. Look at how the marketplace uses digital marketing, and then figure out how can I use that in my ministry.
Yeah.
So for instance, confession, my wife and I watch The Voice, right?
Yeah.
So The Voice has, you watch it, you're engaged with it at least through TV, but then if a singer doesn't get selected and no chairs turn for that singer, then they have what's called the backstage, and there's another person there that's going to coach these people who nobody turns for, and out of that group that didn't get a chair turn to begin with, they're going to come back into the competition later on. They're going to be coached by, in this case, it's BB Rexa, who's a current contemporary, singer. And so, but what they do is they have an app, and if you want to see how those people are doing, they don't usually show them on the television show. You have to go to the app, and then you go back to you click on the app link to the backstage, and you can see what those artists are doing as she's coaching them and so forth, right? So the idea is there are some things you're going to want to have online, and then there are some things you're going to want to take quote unquote offline, meaning outside of your sanctuary, outside of your building. And what might that be? Now it might be teaching. It might be material that you could use for your life groups, your community groups. You're going to have, it might be a way to promote other events that are going on in your church. So an app is a great way to do that. I think, the church I attend, they point everyone every week to the app. In fact, our church doesn't even pass around a plate anymore. They call them joy boxes. They're just kiosks. So there are physical kiosks in the church, but they're pointing everyone back to go to our app, find out what's going on, find out how you can get involved in ministry opportunities, find out which positions are needed within the church, volunteers. They're pointing everyone to the app. So that's how they're using digital marketing. Okay. So, and of course everyone, can record your service now, and you can, there are some that probably are wondering, how do I do that, with video, and I don't have the technology, but most of that is pretty simple nowadays, right? You can, with an iPhone, you can stream a service if you want. I mean, that's not hard to do. So I think to boil it all down is you have to start thinking digital first. Okay, what am I gonna, what kind of things are we doing that we could and would want to share? Now, when it comes down to advertising, I talked to our church in Atlanta about this. They didn't ever implement it, but it was one of the things we discussed, which was draw a circle, because Facebook is really very geocentric. I can drop a pin in Facebook around my church, and I can draw a mile radius around that church, or a 2 mile. So where do you typically draw people from your church? I can drop a pin on that address. I can draw that radius. And now I might be able to, maybe my pastor's got a series on marriage and on marriage, okay? Mm-hmm. So maybe I drop a pin, I draw 5 mile square areas and say, and have my pastor talk about what he's going to be sharing over the next coming weeks about marriage. And it's a simple video. He talks about some of the issues, and then he invites people to come using that small radius. Now that's just a simple advertisement. I don't spend a lot of money. I'm probably going to use a reach objective. I want to reach as many people as possible who are married, because I can now define people who are married, who have, and so because of all the interest-based targeting I can do, I can really narrow it down. So that's just one way to do that. So I can take the $1 dollar a day approach, promote some of the things that are going on in church. I can promote an upcoming series to people who aren't part of our church, because I could actually upload a list of members, and I can exclude them, and I can only reach people who aren't going to our church already. Yeah. So those are just a few ideas.
Well, that's important. I think what you said really stood out. First you got to develop that frame of mind, right? You got to start thinking about it from the perspective, not how to force it into your perspective, right? And say, this is what I want it to do, and I'm going to dump money in there and do what I want, but really having the mindset to approach it as a marketer in a way, right? Which is kind of foreign to a lot of people, right, who are not in the space. But I think that's where, if we can kind of grab hold of that, watch a couple videos or something, that's going to really help, spread the gospel, build the kingdom, and help churches grow.
Right. If you really believe that you have a message that changes lives, why wouldn't you want to get that message into as many people's minds and hearts as possible? And digital marketing can help you do that.
Bam. Well, that's a perfect way to end it. We're currently right now in San Diego on a rooftop, and it's beautiful Social Media Marketing World 2019, and we're on a lunch break, so I don't want to take up too much of your time. I appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you for taking the time. It's great to meet you, and just for the time we've been able to hang out and learn from each other. You're a quality guy, so thank you for your time, and shout out once again to Alejandro for the connection, and that'll wrap it.